Does that mean they can hear us?
Yes, they can hear us now.
I can't talk about anything I should talk about. Actually, that's one thing I didn't see. Do we get to see the numbers of people in?
No, but I have the Twitch and YouTube channels up, so okay, cool. I think we are good to go and live.
To those early watchers, hello, hello.
Mm-hmm.
We're really not going to say much right now. We're just going to sit here.
No, we did all of our pre-show banter before we started this part.
This is what we call agents with coffees.
Exactly. Ooh, you got like a whole fancy Penguin Classics mug.
I didn't even think about it, but this is like an ode to Sterling Lord, you know?
Yeah. That is a good-looking cat.
This one is Holly.
Holly.
When we got Holly, she got ringworm immediately and then lost all her hair. We had to speaking of quarantine, we had to keep her in a place, and it was rough.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gotta sign in again. Just great, knocked out of our thing. There we go, back in.
Well, her coat has come back in nicely. I'm glad to see.
Yes. Okay.
All right, we got some people starting to show up, which is lovely. We're gonna officially start in just a few minutes here.
Yep. That's perfect because I just got signed out of our document. There we go.
This is why we start early.
What are we doing here?
Talking about some stuff.
So I got my most recent computer is one that has a touch screen, and there's some real bonuses to it, but you just find yourself reaching across, trying to touch everything, and then you touch any other computer you see, you're trying to touch the buttons. My wife is consistently stop touching.
Yeah,
it's not going to work.
I was using an iPad pretty consistently for a while as my main computer, and then when I went back to a laptop, I just couldn't help but try and touch everything all the time. So, what are you reading right now, Seth?
I am reading most actively the second book of the new Sylvain Neuvel's trilogy that Tor.com is publishing. And I am also about 3/4 through with Beloved, which I regret to admit that I hadn't read before. And I'm really, really obviously this is why she won all these awards. She's incredible.
She really is incredible. It's been a long, long time since I read that, but I remember it being brilliant.
Yeah, she was a professor at Princeton when I was there. Right. And you couldn't, though she wouldn't teach a fiction class, she would mentor one student in a separate program. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of, you could see her sometimes, but never really interact with her. But I guess that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone we're 1 minute away from start time. We are still going to have this really great banter back and forth for another minute or two while we wait for people to fill in and come see and join us. I hope y'all are doing well, though.
Trying to see. I don't know how we see how many people are watching on YouTube. We got 4 Twitch viewers. We're really busting the numbers so far here. But
this is the way it goes.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm just curious. I'm always curious about the stats. All right.
Now I'm going to go to the
YouTube page. Now 1:00. Do you want to give people another minute or two to filter in, or?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Just as good manners.
Yeah.
There are 37 people watching on YouTube right now. See, there you are.
Hell yeah. Hi guys.
Hello everyone. It's so numbers are so strange online because you we think about them in different contexts, but to have like a lecture with this many people is in a room would be so amazing.
Well, and this is such a specialized topic, right? So, this is not a show that's for every person on the internet. This is for a very specific subset of people who want to work in this very specific industry.
Exactly. So, and frankly, I don't think we're funny enough to sort of, bring in other people just to watch the playful banter.
Indeed. As we're demonstrating now as we vamp for a few minutes here.
We're playing Fortnite, actually, as we speak.
Yes, we are. I actually had an idea for a streaming show that I still want to do at some point. I recognize I'm broadcasting this out to the world, but I want to have a writer on while I play a video game very badly, and the writer gets to pick the video game. And I try to interview them while I'm also trying to play a game that I don't know how to play, which is such a stupid idea because it involves someone just like sitting there watching me play.
While you don't do anything, right?
But also, there's something, I don't know. There's something about the idea that I think it's funny.
Well, maybe you get to switch it around too.
Exactly. Yeah, Mike, that's sort of exactly what I'm talking about. Like a publishing talk show in some video game. But
we got a lot of nice comments coming in already. Hello, everyone. Mm-hmm. Oh, someone saw my cat. Okay, here we are.
Yep.
I think this is one of the things we're going to have to figure out. Everyone is lovely saying hello, but for questions, we'll have to do some scrolling to see. Yeah. But I think should we get moving?
I'm keeping an eye on as it comes in, so I'll flag questions as they come in. But yeah, do we want to go ahead and get started at this point?
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, let's do it. Welcome, everyone, to our first ever edition of Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwon. This being our first episode is going to be riddled with fun learning moments as we try to figure out how best to approach the broad topic of agentdom. So please bear with us, and this will be, probably the last time that I read something from a script. Okay, some housekeeping. We started the series as a resource for those looking to enter the publishing industry, not for writers. We love writers. I'm a writer myself. And if you want to be an agent too, while also being a writer, that's great. I totally get it. We'll talk about that at a future episode. This is the place for you if that's the case, though. But we aren't looking to dish secrets on how to get an agent. Instead, this is meant to be a recognition of the lack of opportunities that New York City-centric agenting presents. And one step into, correcting that reality. How are we going to do this? By offering some of the same tools that expensive publishing courses like the NYU publishing course or Columbia publishing course or hard to afford internships offer, in the form of us two babbling on and on about mundane topics. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll have not mundane topics too, like auctions and signing that new client. But that's sort of what we're doing here.
Yeah, and one thing I want to be really clear about is, while Seth and I have a lot of experience and we've been doing this for a few years at this point, I think we both really feel that we still have a lot to learn about the business. We're not going to have all the answers. There's always a ton of different solutions to all the challenges that we face. And, we're really open to hearing from you guys, if we do step wrong or if some of our fellow professionals have different perspectives they want to add, and those are things that we can talk about down the line. We do want to get a lot of other voices on this podcast, or show, or whatever it is we're doing here, so it's not just me and Seth, and have other people sort of shedding light on different parts of the business and adding in their own experience. But really, part of this is to really start to find ways that we can address the inequalities that organizations like We Need Diverse Books or hashtags like Publishing Paid Me are addressing. And to address some of those issues, Seth and I both feel that the way to do that is we need to start fixing things in our own houses and start fixing things in our side of the industry, right? The more BIPOC agents and editors and marketers and sales staff we get into the business, I think that's how it'll help us build the industry that reflects the audience that we want to connect to. So this is a very tiny, small way that we feel like we can start encouraging those people to, find opportunities in the industry and get some of the resources it takes without, as Seth was mentioning, having to move to New York City on, a $20,000 salary at best, right? So,
well, and as an internship, sometimes they're only now getting paid, you know, and that's
because
nothing.
Free internships are illegal now, right?
I'm sure people are still finding ways to do that, but yes,
I'm sure. I'm sure. So why don't we start with introductions, right?
Sure.
We've sort of started this assuming that everyone knows who we are, but I don't think that's necessarily true. So Seth, who are you? Tell me what you do and where you come from.
Okay, I could spend a whole episode on this, so guys, get ready. No, my name is Seth Fishman. I am currently a literary agent at the Gerner Company. I live in LA and have recently opened up the LA office out here. I represent a pretty wide range of clientele. I think you'll find that most agents, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but a lot of agents pick 2 or 3 lanes. I have always been sort of strange and represent, everything from, and also I don't want to, make this about one things we'll also talk about. There's going to be a lot of that saying, we'll talk about that in the future. But, sort of what are those lanes, right? When I'm about to say literary fiction, there is a definition that no one that like is real or not real. I don't really want to talk about that right now because it's a tricky issue. I would say overall, I represent speculative fiction, but literary fiction, web comics, sci-fi and fantasy, kids picture books, middle grade, graphic novels, sort of a whole 9 yard. And I discovered over the years, I've been doing this for about 15 years, that a lot of my clients don't stay in one lane either when they have the opportunity to do that. So, so that's me in a nutshell. And I'll talk more about where we started in a bit. Dongwan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Dongwan Song. I'm a literary agent, obviously, at the Howard Moorheim Literary Agency. I tend to be a little bit more focused on my list than Seth is. I do almost exclusively science fiction and fantasy, although I also do YA middle grade, and in those areas, I do a little bit more contemporary and sort of outside of just the genre lane that I tend to operate in. I also represent a few nonfiction people, and I'm looking to expand that side of my business. And we can talk about that too as we go down the line about like how you pick the categories you want to work in, and then how you start expanding into new territories. And that's the thing that I've been working on for a couple of years now, is sort of building out from the core business that I have of working within science fiction fantasy. So yeah, I mean, I guess we can sort of get into where we came from and how we got into all of this.
Right. And one of the things that we want to talk about today, to be clear, in the future, we're going to have sort of a very narrow topic that we spend a lot of time digging into and giving you the opportunity to look at things, things as, specific as contracts or how do you choose, like Dongwan just said, how do you choose what lane to go towards? But this, we want to sort of speak a little bit about ourselves and our experience and how we got in here so that you can see some of the snapshots and where we'll go from there. So, my origin story, I suppose, begins with wanting to be a writer. I am one of those people. I'm from West Texas, always want to do the writing gig. And I went to Princeton for the undergraduate writing program. That was my goal. And that's where things started, this game, I guess, which you'll discover as an agent of what writers are trying to do, which is discover the secrets. Like there's all these secrets, and the gatekeepers have them. And while there, getting to work with some great writers and some great teachers, I thought, I still want to be a writer. I'm not done with this process, writing this historical thesis, historical fiction thesis. So I went straight to the University of East Anglia in England. Can you hear my cats? Yeah, that's how. To get a MFA straight away. It's a 1-year program, and that's really where my agenting life sort of focused, because they bring, and a lot of MFA programs do this, they bring in agents. We've both done this plenty of times, to speak to the students. But I was an American, and the UK agents don't tend to hire an American, or take on rather an American writer. So I got to sort of stand at remove as I wanted to get an agent, but I was watching all my friends sort of stand in circles awkwardly, like desperately hoping for their opportunity to speak to an agent. I was like, who are these people? What is going on here? Why are they the people with all the direct connections? Who I always thought it was the editors, right? So that's when I got my mind wrapped around agenting, I suppose, or understanding what that was. And then after after that, I headed back to New York. I was lucky enough. This is part of what we're talking about. I had an aunt who lived in New York. I was lucky enough to crash in my cousin who was in college in her room, and I got a because of a connection through Princeton, I got an internship at the Donald Moss Agency. Got that pretty quickly, and they paid even back then, which is great. And then they also paid me for reading manuscripts. So I was like reading tons of manuscripts just to sort of like eat pizza. And then after that, and I'll get a little bit more detail into this at some point in time, but basically I got an offer to come in for the internship at the Writers House internship program. They have a program for internship, sort of really well done. But I needed a job, and I said, I need like a full-time paying job. What do you got? You know, can you do that? And at that exact moment, the person who was running, a guy named Michael Mejias, who some of you might know of, he said Sterling Lord Literaristic had an opening for an agent. And that's when I came in to Sterling Lord. And I'm, I don't want to go on forever, but basically I started Sterling Lord. I started with three bosses. I think one of the reasons why I think I got the job is that one of my bosses, Rep David Mitchell, and he just coming from the UK, right when he was getting big, he was like one of my favorite writers, and I just sort of blabbered about him, crazily. And then I was there for 5 years before I made the move over to Gernert, and then I was in New York for 7 years before coming out here to LA. So that's me in a brief nutshell.
Yeah. So, wait, I'm hearing an echo. Do you guys hear that echo? Okay. We're going to ignore that and hope it goes away. Yeah, so one of the things about why we're doing this show is that Seth and I actually started out together. Both of us had our first jobs in publishing at Sterling Lord. Seth, I think you started like 3 months after I did.
You were definitely there. You were there when I showed up. Yes.
We had a really lovely thing happen where the whole sort of group of assistants cycled over at the same time, pretty much over the course of like those 3 to 4 months. So almost every single one of us sort of came in and we formed a little cohort and a little class of new people to publishing. I think about a third of us are still in the business in various positions. And that's been really lovely that, we can all still have these connections and still work together and still support each other in a variety of ways.
And I would say, by the way, just to hop in there, is that I think that's sort of rare. I mean, retaining the young agents. I mean, there's one thing that Sterling Lord definitely did at that time was that class of assistants really stuck around and have become successful. And I think that one of the things that they did is what we're trying to do here. So that's another reason why we're trying to do this. But I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, not at all, please. And, so I think that sort of cohesiveness that we had, and we were able to start doing some, sharing things that we were learning from our individual bosses. One thing that you'll find as we talk about this, I think, is every single agent has a really different way of doing business. And, I think Seth and I are sharing our stories right now of how we got into the industry. As you talk to more and more people, you'll find everyone has their own story that tends to be a little unique. It's hard to sort of derive big learnings from each of our individual stories. I think, Seth, you sort of came up through the MFA system and then had some connections that way. For me, I was even luckier in terms of getting into the industry in that I have a family member who is in publishing. My cousin is a literary agent. And, when I moved to New York, I was initially working in TV production, actually. I used to work at PBS at Channel 13. And I did that for about a year and decided that I wanted to work in books. I'd always been sort of a big reader. I'd done a little bit of creative writing in college and was an English major. And so books felt like a really natural fit for me. So then I spent, 6 months while I was working this other job doing informational interviews and starting to explore and figuring out like what area do I want to get in publishing? And, initially I really was focused on getting in on the editorial side. I think a lot of us have this idea that like editor is sort of the glamour job, right? It's like the one that when you think of, I want to work in books, I want to be an editor, I want to work with a company, I want to work with a writer. But then I was offered this opportunity at an agency, Sterling Lord Literaristic, same as the one that, Seth worked at. And just had an interview with the agent there. My cousin got me an intro to him, and then we sat down and sort of had that chat. And it was just a really good conversation. We hit it off sort of right out of the gate. And I worked at Sterling Lord for 3 years before deciding that I didn't necessarily want to be an agent at that time. And we can sort of talk about, why that was maybe down the line. But I switched to editorial. So I went and worked at Orbit, which is Hachette Science Fiction and Fantasy imprint, for about another 3 years, and then jumped from there to a ebook startup. So we were doing a little bit of digital publishing, but really building sort of a marketplace for selling ebooks that was outside of the Amazon system. Did that for several years, and then decided I wanted to get back to working with writers, so came back to agenting. And now I've been at HMLA for about 5 years now, I think.
It's been that long.
So yeah, I know. I think I started in publishing in 2005, so we've been doing this for a minute now. So I think working directly with writers has really come around or has really proved to me like how much I love advocating for the creative side of the business, how much I love supporting the writer themselves, and thinking on a bigger scale. And, we can talk a little bit, I know we keep flagging things that we're going to talk about later, but I think talking about the timeline that an editor thinks about versus the timeline that an agent thinks about and how different those can be was one of the things that's been really interesting to me to explore over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that, we're trying to provide information in all different ways about what it means to be an agent. But for those who are curious, who are right now being, should I go into publishing at all? If so, should I head into, sales and marketing? Should I head into editorial? I will advocate right here and right now for agenting. I do think that the starting process is a little bit hard, and then the transitioning from assistant to being an agent is a little bit hard. But I think the upside of agenting is so high. I think it's the best job in the world. I mean, fundamentally, we just talked about the stuff that we represent, but what do we do, right? What do we do? What we do is we get to discover and or save, in some cases, writers' careers, right? And work with them from the beginning and plan the strategies and connect with them. And editors do this thing where when they want to get a raise, or if they want a higher rank, you can do it in-house, but the easiest way to do it is by moving diagonally somewhere else. Or, you get poached, you get pulled somewhere else. And so you lose, if you're a writer, you lose your agent, your editor all the time. So editors leave those writers. But agents, when I went from Sterling Lord to Gernert, I took every single one of my clients. It was their choice. I didn't say you have to come with me. It was their choice. And that process is what happens. You build these long lasting relationships. And so when I tell writers that finding an agent is like the most important, publishing decision that you have, flip that around to you who want to be an agent, you get to be the sort of most important connection to the career of the business that is being a writer by being an agent. And so I don't know. I think there's some people that might look at agenting as like a parasitic sort of thing where you're just taking 15%. And that is very much what I like to believe, but most agents, no, but that's not the case. It's a real heart and soul kind of thing. And I really recommend you taking it seriously, and you're here. So this is step one.
Exactly. And, I think one of the things that's really behind us wanting to do this show and to really talk about these things is, as you're kind of alluding to, there's no real formal process for getting a job at an agency or getting promoted, moving from assistant to associate agent, and then, even from associate agent to full agent. There's a lot of those steps that are very murky, that change radically depending on what the agency you're at. And, one thing that we don't talk about a lot is how each of us often have really different deal structures with the agencies that we work for, depending on, some people are salaried, some people are fully commissioned, some people have a draw, some people have this percentage, that percentage. And, I think breaking that down is one of the bigger mysteries of people trying to get into agenting. But, one of the big structural barriers is a lot of times the first years of working as an agent are really tough because generally you're getting paid on commission. And if you don't have clients yet, you aren't selling projects yet, then that means you're not pulling in commissions yet, which means you're not making money, right? So how do you support yourself in that time? How do you get the opportunity to grow? And, one thing you mentioned, Seth, was that when you were first getting, I know you're talking about an internship versus becoming an agent, but in that initial internship assistant phase, you were lucky enough to have some housing support, right? You were lucky enough to have an opportunity. that you could live somewhere. And, do you feel like there were other things along the way that helped you out in that kind of way, or like gave you those opportunities? And, how does that fit into how we think about the industry going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the truth of the matter, it wasn't like I was, there's so many things to that question, right? Um, uh, uh, you know, I wasn't running around with a personal bank account that was real. I was living paycheck to paycheck. But I also never really once thought that I was not going to be supported in some way, shape, or form
Hmm.
by the parental system that I had, or even just by my aunt and uncle, who were giving me their space to stay. Um, I will say that. Oh, and then I mean, again, I think again those connections really, and I mentioned it, but like
Yeah.
they really, really matter. Like I wouldn't have got the internship without that, and then that helped the resume in order to get the job at Sterling Lord. Sterling Lord was hustle, right? I applied for things and then got recommended over there. But I had an MFA program. I went to
Hmm.
an Ivy League university. I like for writing, there was all sorts of things that I think played into that. And part of what we want to do here is also not just provide an opportunity for you guys to learn things, but to also try and provide the opportunity to break some of those things down, to give you
Right.
tools whereby you're not in New York, whereby you can say, you can learn these things and be able to come into a meeting for an assistant position. And sure, you haven't been in the office, you haven't been sitting there photocopying, or you haven't seen the nuts and bolts behind the things, some of the things that we can't like naturally just share with you because they're going to be way too boring. Because a lot of internship things is really just sitting around and reading the third level things that people aren't sure if they
Yeah.
want to read. Um, but we want to provide you some of those things to be able to at least crack at some of the doors here, because this is what we were talking about in terms of
Hmm.
how do you create an opportunity for new different agents to come and to join. I don't know about you, Dongwan, but I mean, first of all, you work remotely anyways in Oregon for a good while.
Hmm.
I work remotely, though we just started an office here. It's still remote, right? And now we're on this pandemic where everyone is able to see that it's actually a very viable, real thing. You don't need to be
Yeah.
in the two big or the two big cities in America to,
Hmm.
I mean, LA and New York to do publishing. Like you just don't have to anymore. And so that's one of the things.
Especially for
Yeah,
agenting. Yeah.
exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
because what we do is so decentralized, right? Like we don't need to be in a production meeting every week. We don't need to be in the cover meeting every week. And I would argue, as the pandemic is proving, that you can do those meetings remotely and it still be functional. But especially as an agent, so much what we do is on the phone. There is the networking component in terms of getting lunches with people, but you and you do this now, and I used to do this because I was living in Portland for the first two or 3 years. Then I was an agent, and so you go to New York for a week, 2 weeks, and you just stack all your meetings then, and you meet up a bunch of people. You have some get-togethers. For me, in science fiction fantasy, I go to fan conventions and things like that. So Worldcon, World Fantasy, Comic Cons to some extent, and you meet a ton of people there. You meet writers there, you meet editors, you meet other agents. And those are real opportunities to sort of build out those connections. So I think we think of New York as being the center of publishing, and that is true in a million different ways. But I don't think that is a necessary condition of how we do business. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to flag some of the, I guess, privileges that I have had that helped me get started in this business. And one thing I think about a lot is even when I became an agent again, the place I work, we are fully commissioned. So there's no draw, there's no salary. So that first year, even though I hit the ground running, even though because I'd been in the industry for so long, I was able to get clients and I already had the connections I needed to sell books, so selling stuff pretty much right out of the gate, but it takes time for that money to come in. And, when you're collecting 15% of, say, a $30,000 deal, and then a third of that is paid out, right? You're not bringing in a lot of money on those initial payments, right? So for me, living in a city where the cost of living was so much cheaper than in New York, right? So I was in Portland, Oregon, where everyone complains about the rapidly increased cost of living, but still compared to LA, compared to New York, it was deeply affordable. And I was lucky enough that because I'd had so much time and experience doing other things, that I was able to buy a house there. And so I was living in a situation where I was very financially secure. And I think all the time about how how much that enabled the career that I have now, right? Was over those years, the fact that I was in this really stable situation meant I could take the risks it took to get started as an agent.
I mean, I think that makes total sense. And, there are so many things that lead into what a success is as an agent. And there's a happy career. There's the like, one of the things about being an agent is that it's also a lottery. Like, you could have one client, and you'll be fine. You'll be more than fine. You know what I mean? And what's kind of crazy is that, I mean, I do think there's a bit of a direct correlation to the young agents who early on had a big client and success movements. Like, like,
I think in some ways that's kind of you, right? Like,
exactly. That's
first client. Yeah, or sorry if I'm stealing the thunder out of your story.
Go ahead for it. Go for it. No. Go.
I mean, your first client was Teo Obert, right? Like, and that was a massive literary success, a huge bestseller, like, and just a really sort of very significant book in terms of modern publishing.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm getting, the point to my colleague Chris Parrish Lamb, who's, an incredible agent. His first sale was Hillary Jordan's Mudbound, relatively recently was a movie. And, so Taya wasn't my first client. She was my first sale, maybe like my third client. And I think that's actually something we're going to come and talk about, because that's how you find clients. And I found recommended through my first client, who I don't represent anymore, like this kind of game. But in having a big success right away, it allows you to like have the more opportunities to get more clients. So some of it is privilege, some of it is luck, some of it it's a tricky game. And there's also a really weird thing in agenting, which we'll get to as well in the future, which is, as you're an assistant, you're being paid a salary. Not always a great salary. I think I really do believe editors are paid better starting out of the gate, and they get more benefits. Perhaps a lot more benefits. I mean,
a lot of us don't get healthcare, right? A lot of us are paying for healthcare out of pocket, things like that.
And Sterling Lord was pretty good along those lines. We had even had matching 401ks for a little bit. That's, I mean, what is that anymore? But there's this thing where, after a couple years, you're making this salary, low salary, but it's a salary you've, trained yourself to live on. And then, have the support from the family, which is, again, the privilege. But then you sell a book. And that, like Dong said, like, you don't get a huge amount of money in, but all of a sudden you get a commission check for $2,000, and you're like, I'm rich. I got this money coming in. What is this doing? What can I do with it? And so you're just making this extra. You have your salary, but you get these extra bumps. But then you get to be. They're like, hey, guess what? You're doing great. Congratulations. You're a junior agent or an agent now. We're going to take away that salary and put you on a commission. How many times in your life, or would you imagine that there's a job that you get a big pay cut for your congratulations, big pay cut, and you're left out on your own. And that's the hardest part, is that beginning. And then the part where you're like, I'm not an assistant anymore. And you have to deal with that. So that's, there's lots of things to talk about here.
Absolutely. And, I wanted to talk about sort of these privileged things, not to discourage people, right? I think one thing that's important to us is to be really honest about how difficult it is to get ahead in this industry, how difficult it is to get started in this industry. It's doable, right? Like, I know tons of people who've done this without family support. I know a lot more who have had that family support, have had the education, have this, that, and the other, have been able to afford to go to the Columbia program or those kind of things. And, those aren't inherently bad things, but they do create these structural barriers to people getting into the industry. So, I think us acknowledging those and sort of talking about, like, how do we manage those things will hopefully be helpful to other people to understand sort of the barriers that are in place. And then, okay, how do we start building around those? How do we start figuring out other paths in, knowing those things, right? So I think moving away from a very New York centric model of publishing is one of the first steps in terms of being able to build out a wider, I never like the term diversity, but a wider diversity of people who work in this business, especially on the agenting side.
For sure. Absolutely. And I mean, I guess that leads a little bit into, before we head into questions, we just want to talk about why we're here. Like, what led to this? And, it's become clear after we announced this, by the way. We've been hearing from a number of other publishing people that this has been on the mind, which is great, which means there's like a groundswell of thoughts in this process. But basically, for me, being out here opening the LA office of Gurner Company, I'm sitting there by myself. I want to have the opportunity. I have an assistant. Assistant's great. He's back in New York, and I want to have the opportunity to train someone. So, um, it was actually before the pandemic where, I put out a call, and I am really looking to, again, using the term diversify the industry, because I think it's incredibly important. And and how can we do that, right? We have to hire more people from different backgrounds and places and voices and experiences. So I put out a call for that specific, viewpoint, and I have this list of 15 amazing people in my inbox. But the pandemic hit, and like all of a sudden we're putting pause on things, and we weren't even. I wasn't even the Gurner Company. With Gurner Company support, I was going to do this, but I was just going to do it myself. And I guess I could have still just sort of almost out of, charity, just give someone an hourly wage, but that really didn't make sense to me. I thought, these are these brilliant people here. We're separated here. Can we do something, especially with everything that's going on with the hashtag, publishing paid me, thinking about those kind of things, like, can we do something that reaches wider? And that's when I reached out to Dongwon, and we talked about, and one of the reasons why, first of all, I'm just going to say Dongwon is like the most annoyingly wonderful agent that's out there. And in the sci-fi position, I was very happy, strutting along, doing great things, and being, pleased with my clientele. And then he shows up, and all of a sudden, we like butt heads against things all the time, which is great. That means, in other words, we're fighting for some of the same clients all the time. And I wanted to reach out to him because I've always, we worked together really well back then. But what is one of the things that we did, and he mentioned, is that while we were at Sterling Lord, we literally sat around the table with the other assistants, and we came up with topics that we wanted to learn about as assistants, as younger people in the industry that weren't being taught, because agents just kind of want you to learn from osmosis. And I'm sure that there are agencies that like teach their people a little bit more, but we had to sort of demand that. And this group of people wasn't just, it was Erica Silverman, it was Meredith Caffell, there was other people there that was part of this process. And we started, basically having little courses over specific topics. And that's why I reached out to Dongwon, because he was familiar with that idea. He understood how it affected his career, and he's also really annoyingly good as an agent. And I think he would bring a lot to this. So we were able to come together here. And I know you have more to add to that, so I didn't open the full picture there, but
we've been talking about remote work, especially as we're all quarantined and working from home and things like that. I think remote work is really wonderful, and I'm so glad that it's working out the way it is. But the one downside is you don't get those ad hoc opportunities to learn things, right? You don't get that meeting in the hallway where you just talk to somebody about whatever random topic it is. You're not sitting around that lunch table, as Seth is talking about, and sharing, what you learned that day, what you're struggling with, and those kind of things. And when I think about that lunch table, and I think about that group of us, so many of us who are still in publishing and just like killing it in a variety of different roles. Like Rebecca Friedman has her own agency, Daisy Parente is doing great in the UK. Meredith Caffell, Leah Miller is a wonderful editor. Like all these people who are still, working this business and pushing us forward.
Run your own scouting company. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we could sort of keep listing all day, which is great.
I couldn't help it. It's off of my head.
No. I mean, and we all still talk. We're all still friends, and it's so good. But I think that bond came from us sharing information at that table. And the thing is, every now and again, a senior agent would come in and sit down if they didn't have a lunch with an editor or something like that, and just eat their sandwich with us, and then either listen to us talk or tell us stories. And the problem with this industry is that it's an apprentice-based industry, right? Like there's so much of an expectation that you learn how to edit by working with an editor, you learn how to be an agent by working with an agent, you learn how to be a scout, you learn how to do all these different things, not through formal training programs, but just by watching someone else do it, right? So there are a few problems. One is, how the hell do you break in if you don't know how to do the job? Second is, what if you're with somebody who's not good at their job, right? Like, what if you're being mentored by maybe even someone who's a great agent, but just is a difficult person or isn't a good teacher or a good manager, right? So there are so many ways in which that we're losing tons of really talented people because there aren't the opportunities, not just to work, but to learn, right? So, it was funny when we announced this, I had a few people reply to my tweet being like, why don't you just start your own agency? And I was like, no, because it's very nice for them to think that I could do that. I'm not in a position to do that. But even if I did, I'm doing what? Hiring 3 people, 4 people, right? Like tops. And you're sort of in that position now with starting up the LA office for Gartner, where you have this opportunity to hire people. But again, that's so one-on-one. That's so 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, maybe, right? Maybe over a career, 20, 30 people, right? But if we can do this, where we can reach out to more people and at least expose some of the stuff that we have learned over the years just by doing this, I think that can be really helpful. And then also showing sort of the diversity of points of view and experience, right? Like, Seth, I think you and I, even though we've known each other for so long and work in similar fields, and you're an incredible agent, I'm sprinting here to catch up with you. You keep saying very uncomfortably nice things to me, and I would like you to stop doing that. But I think you and I approach the business in different ways. I think we have different ways of selling books, of finding clients, of working with our clients. And, your model or my models, neither one is more valid, right? And there's tons of other models that other people have. And so I think one of the nice things about this is we can start really introducing people to the range of ways you can be in this business and the range of ways you can do stuff depending on what genre you're in, depending on how you work with your clients, and depending what your goals are as an agent. So, I think the more we can sort of model this in a way where we can have those sort of water cooler conversations that people can almost overhear and learn a little bit from that. Obviously we're being a little bit more structured about trying to be educational, but for me, I'm always going to be thinking about those lunch table conversations and how important they were for me to start learning at least the bones of how this business works.
Yeah.
And so to that point, I think one of the things that we want to do is really take questions from the audience here. So, we've had 1 or 2 come in, but if you guys have other questions that you're thinking of, please drop them in the chat and then we'll see them and discuss them. We're also setting up an email address, and we'll give that out at the end, that you can email questions to us as they occur to you throughout the week, and we'll try to address them as we go.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, those are all great points. And one of the things that to be clear about the lunch table conversations that we had is that we also did pick topics, and we spoke specifically about that. Contracts, brought in contracts. And you know what's crazy about that? Every publisher has a different contract, different ways of looking at those things. And so we want to get into the granular level with those things too. So again, we're sort of going all over the place right now, but we're going to focus in pretty clearly there. And one of the things we'd love to hear from you, and some of these questions might be ones that we can answer now, or other ones that we'll file away to be able to answer in the future. But we want to hear, even topics that you care about, or that are you're really interested in, along those lines. And the other thing, Dongwon, do you want to drop in the donation link as well? We want to make sure, we're not doing this for anything. We're doing this for y'all. But if you do want to donate to, you can see the link coming in POCandpublishing.com. We'd be more than happy to be the instigator of that, as a high five. So, okay, this is interesting. So questions are now starting to come in, and I guess that's what we should do. We should start heading to the question section.
Let's do some questions. So I'm going to start off with this one from Ayla. I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name badly. You were saying, in your time in agenting, have you seen or contributed to any efforts to unionizing the field collectively to increase access to healthcare or other benefits? This is a really great question. And unfortunately, I think publishing is, or at least agenting, is structurally set up in a way that would make unionization very difficult. I think I like the concept of it and the idea of it. And we do have some professional organizations like the AAR, what the hell does AAR stand for? Something authors representatives.
Agents, authors, representatives. Authors, agents, representatives.
Yes. Okay.
I know you're watching right now, Farley.
I know. We're in trouble now. I think the AAR is a wonderful organization that really helps provide some sort of ethical standards and communicates a lot of information around, how we're all doing business, how we're collectively negotiating with the publishers. But it's not really set up as a thing to really address, healthcare issues or unionization issues across the industry. So, one thing in terms of the issues that Seth and I have been thinking a lot about and have been very vocal recently on Twitter and things like that is there are a number of groups like POC and Publishing, which, we're encouraging you all to donate to. They're a wonderful organization that I've done a lot of work with in the past. And Latinx in Pub, We Need Diverse Books. There's a number of these organizations that I think are working really hard to build structure and to add resources for people who want to become agents and young, especially BIPOC people in the publishing industry. Seth, do you have anything to add to that before we move on? Or
yeah, just a generalized comment about this is nuts and bolts agenting here, or rather broad scope agenting. But I think one of the biggest problems with the agenting industry is actually this lack of, is sort of the competitive nature of it, right? First of all, anyone can be it. You don't need any license or anything, which is a good and bad thing. But I think that one thing we'll discuss is like problems in agenting is that we lose on a agent-wide level and industry level a number of rights battles with the publishers because a section of agents might not care enough about certain things. So ebook royalty rate, guess what? It's crappy. And we lost that fight a long time ago because agents can't you get together too much, and that's called, that's called collab. What is it called? I'm totally blanking on. Collusion. There you go. And same thing with the audiobook rights. Those are two subset rights that people didn't think too much about back when. And there are certainly some agents who did, and you fought for the better rights and royalty rates from them when it used to be a thing. And then publishers, like one day publishers were like, hey, we need audio rights in all your contracts. The fact of the matter is, if every agent said no, that wouldn't have happened. But guess what? They get them in all their contracts now.
Trying to wrangle a group of agents is like trying to herd cats, right? Like, we are an ornery group of people who are not, there's a reason we don't work for big corporations. There's a reason I don't work for Hachette Book Group anymore. That's because, hey, I didn't like being told what to do and going to meetings. So when you have that as a group of people, it sometimes is hard to get coordination across all those different groups.
Right. So a question and yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't mean that, felt a little abrupt. Right. And okay, but so again, another topic. All these things are topics. A question that came my way from Matt Belford. I don't know if you can see it. You want to put it up there? Yep. How long did it take you to become established agents? So I'm going to assume that established agents is sort of a twofold answer. One is such that you have money and you're surviving on like the clients that you bring in, which is one. And in other words, not as an assistant salary or whatnot. And the other might be such that people come to you or know you for who you are. And I think those are sort of two different things. But basically, one of the trickiest thing is that money that comes in doesn't come in right away. You make a $100,000 deal for a client. You get 15% of that. You might have a split with your. You probably do have a split with your agency. So you get even less of that, and then that gets paid out in quarters, and only a certain chunk of that comes in during a year. You have to have you have to make a decent amount of deals to be able to make, a decent amount of money. So I would say, I mean, when I started taking on people, year 1.5, maybe 2, and then, it's probably 5 to 6 years before you're sort of locked in as an established agent. Again, you could sell one big book and people are like, this is this person's, agent. But it does take a good while. And then the other thing that's really important in terms of, reputation in a certain place, your clients have to win awards or be bestsellers before people like look at you along those lines. And that's just a further down, that's just like you sticking with your clients along the way. And I represent, again, a lot of different things. So like no one in the literary space knows that I represent a lot of Hugo Award winners. They don't care. I think some people care, but not many. And so it's interesting. You can work really hard in one place and people, or like, especially the kids place, that's a whole different realm. So they have no idea. When I send a submission out, it's a different thing. I'm like a different level agent in that spot, even though in my head I'm not. So you have to, it's a bit of a game.
It's funny because I had been working in science fiction fantasy as an agent, and I've been doing pretty well. I had a bunch of also had some award winners and things like that.
Congrats,
and I felt pretty established. Thank you. And then I moved back to New York and got an invite to the Golden Kite Awards, and I'd sold like a couple YA projects, but hadn't been really in that field. I had maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 projects at that point. And I remember I went to that SCBWI event, and I was like, oh, I know no one here. And I just felt once again like I was a baby agent and just felt like completely overwhelmed by how little I knew this social space, and I knew all these people. And I was like, oh, every time I move categories, every time I move genres, I'm going to be starting over from the ground up. And, obviously I have more skills. I have a certain level of confidence now that I maybe didn't have when I was like, 25, and that helps an enormous amount in terms of building that up. But it is every now and again this sort of incredible ego check every time you try to slide into a new category of like, oh, nobody knows who I am, and I have to prove myself all over again, which is on one hand frustrating, on the other hand a really delightful challenge. But we sort of wandered off topic a little bit. Matt, I don't have a lot to add to your question about how to become an established agent, because as soon as I started taking on clients at Sterling Lord, I bounced. I went to editorial. So
that's how you do it. You get a job as an editor where everyone's like, oh, I want to work with an editor.
Exactly. So when I came back into agenting, I already had all these connections, and I was in a really different position. So I don't have a lot of useful information to add there. Okay, so this is an interesting one that I want to talk about. So Long Bingo is asking, to what degree are agents involved in the issues raised by hashtag publishing paid me? If you guys don't know, this is a hashtag that's been going around on Twitter about advance sizes, where authors were invited to self-report their different advances over their career. The goal was really to highlight, and it was started by L. McKinney, and the goal was really to highlight the pay discrepancies between cis white authors and especially Black writers. And, I think it was a super interesting conversation. It's a very complicated one, and especially I think as agents, Seth, you probably agree with me. I don't know. We haven't talked about this one too much, but advances are such a complicated topic, and there's so much that goes into them. And we could spend, and probably will spend, 3 to 4 of these things just talking about how to think about advances and different aspects that go into them. And I'm not sure what involved by necessarily means here, but the truth is, yes, we're very involved in these because we're the ones negotiating these agreements. We're not determining how much that advance is. That's on the publisher side. But for us, we're the ones negotiating those agreements. We're the ones who, are responsible for sending those out, for finding the editors that we want to work with. So there's a lot of involvement, even though we are not necessarily a determining factor in the size and scale of those deals.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you chose this one, because this is really the other reason why we're doing this conversation in general, is to make sure that we, look these issues in the eye. And I think one of the things that's important to remember here is, ultimately, what is the result of publishing pay me, which is a clear understanding that there is a difference in expectations and pay, and also the way that books are talked about in publishing houses. Maybe that means the way that books are talked about by agents. Now, agents are different though, right? It's one person, right? And you can talk about it with your house a little bit, but when an agent takes on a project, they believe in it, right? And I'm not trying to give agents a pass. Please don't think I'm trying to do that at all. What I'm saying is that book on submission already has like I want this book to work by the agent, whereby the editor or the sales force that might be talking about how there's problems with books by a Black writer is in a different place, because you already have that agent who's trying to support that book. But I want to,
I think that, just to jump in real quick, I think the fact that we're so independent both increases the risk of bias, right? Because there's no one checking that one person. It also, in a weird way though, increases opportunity, right? Because if I want to take something on, all I have to do is say, I believe in this project. And anyone else who disagrees with me, you're gonna have to fight with me about why they disagree, right? So I can advocate for something without having to worry about trying to get it past my publisher or past my sales force. I then have to convince a publisher or the publishing company to get on board. But it's a different challenge for me, and it really reframed how I feel about relating to certain writers and certain topics that I think are really important to me, that I want to be working on in a way that was more challenging when I was at a publisher.
Right. And one of the key words that he just said right there was convincing. So when you talk about involvement, that's us doing the job of the editor to convince those other people to buy the book. Now, we do that with any writer of any race. However, and it's kind of shitty. It is not just kind of, it is shitty to think that you would specifically have to come up with comp titles, comparative titles that like a publisher looks at and sees how many copies it sold to use as a basis of putting up numbers to buy a book. that we would have to do that job for them in terms of other, oh, you know, a black writer can sell this many copies, or hey, this happened, you know, like that we would have to do that job. So that's an involvement that we could have. But one thing I want to do is I do want to say something about hope here in terms of, you know, the thing that was confusing to me about the public, or I think not to me, to I think everyone in the publishing paid me thing, is that there's a lot of lack of context. Which one of these books were agented? Which one of these, like, how good was the agent of that book, of that author? You know, what is the context of the publishing house, and whether they're known to be like stingy and awful, that kind of thing. That doesn't mean it's okay. I just think there's important to know these, like, you know, there's just all the context, and that's what we want to talk about here. We want to talk about that context. And one thing I will say right now is that the publishing industry in terms of hiring is clearly just really off. It's not okay, and that's a big problem. But the publishing industry has been making a real effort to try and buy books of diverse voices for a couple years now, and I think that when I saw, the reason why I bring this up is because I saw some writers say some things like, well, I'm crushed now. And I think that some of what was talking about in that thing was a little bit of a past tense. I'm not trying to say racism is not there. I'm trying to say right now there's some real strides being done. And I tell you as an agent that there's some real opportunities, right? We can make a voice. We can choose who we want to work with and push that person. And there is reception coming our way. And part of it is, you know, and there are some places that are better than others. Like, to look at YA publishing. There are imprints being created or have been created to specifically address this issue. Now look at adult literary fiction. Maybe One World.
There's One World.
There's One World, but that's it.
And then there's One World.
There's One World, and I can speak directly. I have spoken directly to editors and publishers about that. And the, you know, the argument and the conversation that they have there is like, well, that sort of creates a narrow that actually doesn't allow for all of us to just take on and rep, which I buy. But at the same time, there are places that it's working more than others, and sci-fi is a great place for this. I mean, we've had there's been battles, sad puppies. This has been going on in sci-fi.
Well, you know, I think that's the thing that, you know, in science fiction fantasy, you know, I don't know that people outside the genre really know this, but there've been a lot of, you know, when I was at Orbit, the two editors there were me and David Pillay, who's now the publisher of Tor. And so, you know, the editorial staff, we were all POC, right? Like, and, you know, we had an assistant, and then our publisher obviously was a British white man, which, you know, does have an impact. But, you know, I do feel like Dave and I were able to advocate for certain things. And, you know, Orbit is still a hugely diverse imprint. There's POC and queer folk working throughout the genre, which has been really nice. And I think that's really reflected in how much the genre has been able to push forward in the past few years in terms of representation, in terms of seeing so many exciting books come out that have really different kinds of representation out there, which did lead to, you know, the Sad Puppies backlash. But I've always taken that as a sign that we're making progress rather than we're moving backwards. But
and again, anyway. That's both. We're not trying to be apologetic there, right? There is an issue. The issue is real, but we are here. You know, this is what we're here for. Is we want to give you who are watching right now the opportunity to come join our ranks and to speak to the greater cause, and to introduce our world to the world whereby, you know, even if you do, you know, books that are being published aren't also like, you know, tragedy porn, but like just fucking awesome books by, you know, people of color. You know what I mean? It's so this is this is the time, and this is why we're here. So
and you know, I want people to separate on their heads systemic issues versus individual opportunities, right? You know, so publishing is really highlighting the big systemic issue that the industry faces that we need to address. I don't want writers to go take that home and say, well, I'm never going to get that opportunity. I'm never going to get that advance. Right. And, you know, I think there are people who are getting those things. The question is, are there, like, how many and what percentage? And, you know, not that there's like, there's an end goal in terms of like, oh, if we hit 35%, we're done. We can stop talking about this, right? That's not how this works. But I think the challenge is how many people are getting opportunities and second chances versus who doesn't get those opportunities. Right. That's the systemic issue we really need to be addressing versus the individual opportunity of you as a writer or you as an agent getting that job, selling that book, whatever those things are. So
exactly.
right,
And
shall we
one
move
of the
on?
things that,
Oh,
and
sorry.
we just, no, I'm not going to keep going. I'm saying we have time for another one or two questions. And the thing is, though, we're going to talk in depth about some of these things. We're not going to just ping on them. That's what we're here for. We got a lot of time. And so even though we're running out of time, we have the opportunity to dive into some of these questions and then hear your future questions. So, all right. I hadn't even picked another one.
Let's
I'm
do
sorry to
like
say.
two more questions,
Okay.
and then we're gonna keep a log of all the other questions. And if we have time to get to these in the future, we would love to. But you guys
All right.
are
You
bringing
start
a
this one.
number of fantastic questions.
I'll be back once
All
my
right, you want me
cat
to pick one?
being crazy. Yeah,
Okay.
my bat's being. I'm just got to get her out of this room.
All right, go for it. Okay, so question from Allison Wilgus, who is a brilliant freelance comics editor, and also you guys should go listen to Allison's podcast, Graphic Novel TK. It's an incredible primer in terms of how graphic novels are published in the traditional publishing industry and just sort of how comics works generally. Anyways, done plugging your podcast, Allison. Do you find that aging culture, standard practices, norms, etc., change dramatically between different genres and age categories? This is yes and no, right? I do think that there are some things that are different, and there's certain expectations that are different. So, royalty rates in young adult and middle grade, so kidlit generally, are really different from adult royalty rates. There's certain deal points that will change across those things, right? I think the expectation of an advanced level within a genre imprint versus, a Knopf or FSG are going to be really different as well. So there are different things that do change between those things. That said, the general practices in terms of how you network, how you connect with people, what you talk about at lunch. I mean, all those things are generally the same. You're gossiping about different people if you're in a kidlit lunch versus an adult lunch. I think the players will change, but not necessarily the big cultural norms. All right, I'm going to keep going while Seth continues to deal with his very adorable cats. Okay, Rachel Mann asks, what is your advice for new agents trying to establish relationships with editors while working remotely? Seth, do you have one for this? Because, you've been doing a lot of remote work recently. You're still muted.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that New York is still an important, or connections are still important, an important part of the game. And in an ideal world, you could theoretically be in New York somehow for a bit, like Dalman said, you come in for some. So I would say, though, that especially now, one of the great bonuses of the pandemic is that it is changing things. People are much more open to things. Now, I think having a coffee back and forth with an editor might be a little bit hard, but I think still at the same time, some of it's about really just making sure that you reach out to let people know who people are. Like one of the ways that especially if you're a young agent who actually has a book under the belt, you can actually send physical copies of those books to people, and then you can connect along those lines. But the big ones are making sure that you participate in the community. And one of the tough things about being an agent, you can be an introvert and you can have a great eye. And I think that, and the book will sell for itself. But I do think the reality of the matter is that if you don't say hi to a person, or if you don't connect to a person, or if you don't send that person an email with a book submission, then they're not going to get to know who you are. So some of it is taking a little bit of a plunge, and you can do that through your colleagues. You can connect through your colleagues. You can find the other agents and use them as a step, as a stem over, which has happened. Like, so in LA, for instance, we have Drinklings, which is a group of agents and editors and writers in the sci-fi community that comes together. And I've met other agents there, and then afterwards, some of those agents will connect to me about submission lists or about connecting to different people. And I'm happy to do that. I do not just stick within my lane in my publishing house. I mean, not my publishing house, sorry, my agency. I make sure that we connect abroad, because it's only good for everyone. And I think that's the thing, is that we are a community, and you just need to take that small step in order to then have a larger footprint, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on a couple things here. Twitter is a great way to meet people. Twitter has been really essential to my career in terms of connecting with other agents, with writers, and also with editors. I can't tell you the number of times I've said something on Twitter and I'll get a reply from an editor who I don't know. And then that's an opportunity down the line for us to have that conversation, or at least that name recognition, right? So just being out there, being part of the community, it just gets people to remember your name and know who you are, even if you don't have the direct connection. Conferences are also a great way. I go to conferences not to meet writers, but to meet other industry professionals, also because they pay me. But I'm not there generally trying to pick up clients. We'll talk a lot about how we get clients in future episodes here. But, really for me, those are networking opportunities. You're locked in a hotel with a few other people, and there's opportunities where you can get lunch, you can go hang out. An editor and I became friends by riding a roller coaster together in Las Vegas. You never know what those opportunities are going to be. And those are really wonderful ways to build those connections and get to know people, and then you can submit to them further. The last thing I want to say is do not be afraid of the cold email. Just send someone an email. Worst case scenario, they delete it and don't read it. They're not going to remember your name. They're not, if they don't talk to you, they're not going to remember you, right? So you've lost literally nothing. It sucks to send a cold email and not get a response, but at the end of the day, it's worth doing it, because 1 in 5, 1 in 3, someone will email you back and be like, oh, hey, it's so nice to meet you. I'll think of you down the line. Or again, that name recognition thing. So when you do send them a submission, they're like, oh, right, that person. Or, oh yeah, sure, I'll get a coffee with you, or whatever.
And think about your writers. They have to deal with rejection all the time. And they have to deal with rejection. That their rejection is your rejection. It's people rejecting your taste. You can sell a book for $1 million, hashtag paid in publishing, and or publishing paid me, and you still have 13 rejections in that process. I mean, it's just a crazy business where that kind of happens. And I just had to add back on to that conferences. I mean, there are lots of places that want agents to come, and they can be random sort of seeming, but lots of big people come from those places. Like a perfect example for me is that when I was young in the agenting space, I went to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania every year because they paid very well. And the writers were, I ended up not taking on any writers there, though I tried to. But at the table where the other editing professionals were, and so on and so forth, and writers, I met a number of people, including Marlon James before Marlon became big, or a couple other people.
I was into Marlon James before everyone else was, card.
He came from that place, but I did. But the funny thing is that I was going to say the other person there was Colin McCann, and but in meeting Colin McCann then read Taya's book, and then he ended up choosing Taya to be one of the 535s. And sometimes he wouldn't have taken that from no one he didn't sit down with. And that was at a random, what I meant to say is at a random place you will meet a random person, and that person, who knows what happens. And part of what agenting is, it's a long game business. So the people that you meet at these early things, I see some people talking about doing these a lunchtime hangout, which is great. The people you're meeting right now are people who are, and you do the same thing with editors too. They're going to end up being editor-in-chiefs at some point in time. The people that we first met are running the show now. So it's just really about, some of it is really just about being a sincere person with a good eye, who's friendly and gives and is willing to do favors and willing to give back those favors, and just create those real connections, because that will help people and help everyone, and you lift it together. And so what we're not lifting, again, is voices that we haven't been hearing, but that's part of what we're doing in that process as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize enough. Life is long. You never know where people are going to end up. You never know who's going to be running an imprint, who's going to be running an agency, who's going to, be working with a writer that you really need that blurb from. I don't even know what it is, but when you can, it is always a good idea to default to being kind, default to being nice. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't call out bullshit when you see it. When you see someone being shitty, then it is always worth calling that out. It is always worth pushing back on that. But barring that situation, all things being equal, just make a connection, right? It doesn't have to be a big one. It doesn't have to be a lifelong friendship. It can just be like, hey, we met at that thing. We had a nice chat. I'll see you here next year, right? Or, hope to run into you at another party, hope to send you a submission sometime. So you can just think about those things as you're sort of trying to build out those relationships, especially if you're not here in the city and able to get lunch with every single person and get a coffee with every single person.
Right. So I guess we're sort of here at the end of our time, and I want you to know I'm looking, and there's all these amazing questions, and we're going to hit every single one of them in our time and in our ting. I don't know what ting is. So just make sure you keep showing up to our ting I don't want to keep that. I was just ending too much. Okay. But make sure you keep showing up because we want to hit everything that you're talking about, and we will. This is not something that's going to be a one-time thing. We could go on this for a long period, and we also are going to have guests at some point in time speaking even more specifically about more specific things, because who are we to say that we are everything in the industry? Heck no, we don't know everything. So we're really happy that you're here, though, and I think this is a great thing to see all your questions and your curiosity and your interest. So thank you for that.
Can I just say I'm also watching the chat and seeing you guys starting to form a community that you guys want to form a Slack or like Zoom lunchrooms, and it is filling my entire heart right now. You guys are the best. I'm so excited about this. Thank you to everyone for tuning in to Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwon. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I certainly did. Seth, where can people find you if they want to bug you on the internet? Or
sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Seth A.S. Fishman. I'm going to put that in the comments as well, somewhere in there. And you can find me on Instagram in the same, Seth A.S. Fishman. Or you can find me, at the Gurner Company, which I'll put in, as well. So very happy to have that. And Dongwon, what about you?
Well, do you also have any books you would like to plug in this moment?
Gosh, I'm overwhelmed by that. I'm overwhelmed by that question. I have so many great...
I'm just pointing out that you might have had a picture book come out recently that maybe...
Oh, you mean my own?
About.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So see, I was trying to keep... I write picture books. I'm a writer, as you can see. So I had a book called The Ocean in Your Bathtub. So for anyone who has kids, between the ages of K through 4, it just came out. We have this really cool online video of me like going through an aquarium, reading the book and interacting. I'm really proud of it. So hopefully, and the amazing Isabel Greenberg illustrated it. So hopefully y'all can check it out.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but you just can't turn off the agenting thing. You know what I mean? Like, we got to help people.
It's very kind of you. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Dongwon, DONGWON, and you can subscribe to my newsletter, Publishing is Hard, on Substack. There you'll find me talking about my experiences in publishing and various issues, sort of in longer form essay format. We will be back next Friday at 1 p.m. EST and 10 a.m. PST on YouTube and on Twitch. If you guys are watching this, you guys are already here. And if you have questions, you can email us. You can email us at agenttalkshow@gmail.com. Until then, be good, read more, and publish better. Peace, y'all.
Bye.